Okay, go for it.
All right, this is an experiment we're doing. I'm David Nelson. I'm the editor of the Kitsap Sun. Today we're using Google Hangouts to have a conversation with Josh Farley, who's a reporter, covers the Bremerton beat for us here. And recently, Josh has been writing a lot about the heroin surge, or the rise in heroin use in Kitsap County. We're calling it Needle Surge in a package of stories that we've done. There was another one in Sunday's edition about a detox center in the county and how that's trying to handle the issue too. So what I wanted to do is just take a few minutes to let Josh talk to you about why he covers the issue and kind of some of the things that we think it's important for readers to understand about this. So Josh, maybe the first question I want to ask, how did you first get on the topic? I think it's been since 2008, maybe was our first story, but
Right.
what was the beginning of your interest in the rising use of heroin?
Yeah, I guess in my former job here as the police reporter, I started to notice that when I go and read the police reports, as we often do at both the county sheriff's office and the Bremerton Police Department and elsewhere, that the drugs that the police were increasingly finding were not your crystally meth or powdery cocaine, things like that. They were prescription drugs created by drug companies, used by basically being diverted from their proper use, and they were falling into the hands of criminals. And increasingly, our drug task forces here in Kitsap County, the West Sound Narcotics Enforcement Team and the Bremerton Police Special Operations Group, started doing busts where they would buy and sell these kinds of drugs, and more people became addicted to pills, things that have a proper use. They call it diversion in drug enforcement terms. So it kind of struck me as odd at first, but that this trend was increasing. And from what I learned from treatment experts, law enforcement, that basically a prescription opiate is not very different. In fact, at the core of it, it's the same thing as heroin. And there was a fear then that people may start to jump over. Some people had, because they offered the same high, this sort of dreamy, euphoric, very numb feeling, but it hadn't quite happened yet, and it wouldn't for a couple more years. But once it did, basically the drug cartels from the south, the Mexican drug cartels, started bringing cheap black tar heroin up, and because it was cheaper, it offered a cheaper alternative, and the rest is history.
The police chiefs around the county had a meeting. Some other law enforcement and legal profession officials got together in, I believe it was December, to talk about this a little more in depth. And then, of course, in your story yesterday, Scott Lindquist from the Kitsap Health District mentions how he thinks the new mental health tax is maybe going to start to approach this problem in a different way also. What do you see from their end of things? What's the next step that the law enforcement community is going to take here in the county?
Sure. I think law enforcement's probably is a pretty traditional approach. They're going to be doing by bus. They're going to be looking for not so much the low-level user, but working up the chain, going back. There's really, like I said, a fairly traditional. I think what you'll see change with that maybe that 1/10 of 1% sales tax money and existing monies that are out there. Dr. Lindquist is a strong believer, for instance, in just treatment. We have to get people who are addicted to these drugs. We have to give them more treatment options. The difficulty with opiates, of course, as you know, David, is that the withdrawals are from what I've heard, they're very, very difficult to go through. It's like a flu. It's like the worst flu you've ever had. Most people do not die from the withdrawals, but just getting through them is the difficult part. So how do we get them into treatment? How do we keep them in treatment? And how do we keep them clean is really the challenge of this.
The story last week about Philip Seymour Hoffman dying in New York City, it's not a local story to us, but it's a name that everyone knows around here, and definitely kind of, I think there's, everyone hearing that, there's a more awareness to heroin itself. What do you think is the thing the public in Kitsap County needs to know about this drug the most?
Well, there's a few things, but to me, the biggest thing is that it affects everyone, and that I think it basically covers all walks of life, the rich, the poor. socioeconomic status does not matter, and increasingly young people are shooting heroin, which to me is a very scary thing. I think the transition is what makes that happen. Prescription opiates have been prescribed at a greater level than they ever have been before. Even though governmental controls, people have become more aware that it's not a good idea to just introduce an opiate, just give a pack of Percocet or something to everyone. You have to be careful about how you do it, but because societal exposure to opiates is so much greater, the problem is if you do believe, and most science backs this up, that you have genetic predispositions to certain addictions, if it falls into the person who becomes addicted to an opiate, they will not have a problem sliding over to heroin. If they hadn't tried it, the thought of heroin would be a terrible idea, but once they have, and once they become addicted, cheap, this muddy, mushy, awful stuff, they will inject it into their veins, and we know the health consequences that come with that. Of course, you're buying drugs illegally to start off with, but intravenous drug use introduces all kinds of risks as far as diseases, bacterial infections, and of course, we also know, as in the case of Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's most likely you can get a bad batch, or you can take too much, and it's respiratory failure. You simply go to sleep and don't wake up.
Yeah, last fall your reporting actually talked about a father and then a daughter. Were some of the nicer stories you wrote, some of the more impactful stories you wrote about people losing their lives. Thanks for the reporting you do. Thanks for taking the time to chat real quick on this. It's a fun little experiment. We may do it more on some other issues that Kitsap Sun reporters are focusing on in the future. So with that, that's our conversation, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, David.